Whiskey or whiskey is a type of liquor made from fermented grain mash. Whiskey is typically aged in wooden casks, which are typically made of charred white oak. The typical unifying characteristics of the different classes and types are the fermentation of grains, distillation, and aging in wooden barrels. The word whiskey, or whisky, is an anglicization of the classical Gaelic word uisce, or usage, meaning water, now written as uisce in modern Irish, and usage in Scottish Gaelic. 1488 to 1513 reportedly had a great liking for Scotch whiskey, and in 1506 the town of Dundee purchased a large amount of whiskey from the Guild of Barber Surgeons, which held the monopoly on production at the time. The distillation process was still in its infancy. Whiskey itself was not allowed to age, and as a result tasted very raw and brutal compared to today's versions. In America, whiskey was used as currency during the American Revolution. George Washington operated a large distillery at Mount Vernon. In 1850, Andrew Usher began producing a blended whiskey that mixed traditional pot still whiskey with that from the new coffee still. A still for making whiskey is usually made of copper, since it removes sulfur-based compounds from the alcohol that would make it unpleasant to drink. The simplest standard distillation apparatus is commonly known as a pot still, consisting of a single heated chamber and a vessel to collect purified alcohol. Column stills are frequently used in the production of grain whiskey and are the most commonly used type of still in the production of bourbon and other American whiskeys. Whiskeys do not mature in the bottle, only in the cask, so the age of a whiskey is only the time between distillation and bottling. Whiskeys that have been bottled for many years may have a rarity value, but are not older, and not necessarily better, than a more recent whiskey that matured in wood for a similar time. Distillers will sometimes age their whiskey in barrels previously used to age other spirits, such as port, rum or sherry, to impart particular flavors. Whiskey is probably the best known of Scotland's manufactured products. Whiskey or whiskey-like products are produced in most grain-growing areas. They differ in base product, alcoholic content, and quality. American whiskey is distilled from a fermented mash of cereal grain. Some types of whiskey listed in the United States Federal Regulations, 11, are. These types of American whiskey must be distilled to no more than 80% alcohol by volume, and barreled at no more than 125 proof. Only water may be added to the final product. The addition of coloring or flavoring is prohibited. There is no minimum aging period required for a spirit to legally be called whiskey. The historic popularity of Canadian whiskey in the United States is partly a result of rum runners illegally importing it into the country during the period of American Prohibition. The distillery was established in 2009, and in 2020 they launched their first 10-year-old whiskey. The distilleries producing French whiskey include Glen Ar Moor and Werringham in Brittany, Guion in the Champagne region, and Grillet Dupic in Lorraine. New Georgian blended whiskey is presented with 3 varieties, such are. In 2017 on World Whiskey Masters degustation contest which happened in London, Georgian whiskey got silver medal in different categories. On the same year Georgian whiskey was rewarded with its first gold medal and silver medals on the contest, Global Travel Retail Spirits Masters. German whiskey production is a relatively recent phenomenon, having only started in the early 1990s. The styles produced resemble those made in Ireland, Scotland and the United States. Single malts, blends, wheat, and bourbon-like styles. There is no standard spelling of German whiskies, with distilleries using both whiskey and whiskey. Distilled alcoholic beverages that are labeled as whiskey in India were commonly blends based on neutral spirits that are distilled from fermented molasses, grain with only a small portion consisting of traditional malt whiskey, usually about 10 to 12%. By 2022, India produced many whiskies both for the local market, the most lucrative market for whiskey in the world, and export. Indian single malts comprised 15% of the local market in 2017, increasing to 33% in 2022. There are several types of whiskey common to Ireland: single malt, single grain, blended whiskey and single-pot still whiskey. Irish whiskey was once the most popular spirit in the world, though a long period of decline from the late 19th century to the late 20th century greatly damaged the industry. 65. So much so that, although Ireland boasted over 30 distilleries in the 1890s, a century later this number had fallen to just 3. Japan produces both single malt and blended whiskies. In recent years, though, Japanese whiskey has grown in popularity on the global market. Whiskey made in Scotland is known as Scotch whisky, or simply as Scotch, especially in North America. The basic types of Scotch are malt and grain, which are combined to create blends. Although distillation of whiskey in Wales began in Middle Ages, there were no commercially operated distilleries during the 20th century. Initially a Prince of Wales, malt whiskey was sold as Welsh whiskey but was simply blended Scotch bottled in Wales. Friesk Hinder is a Frisian single malt, distilled and bottled in the Height distillery. In 2008, at least 2 distilleries in the traditionally brandy-producing Caucasus region announced their plans to enter the Russian domestic market with whiskies. Whiskies and other distilled beverages, such as cognac and rum, are complex beverages that contain a vast range of flavoring compounds, of which some 200 to 300 are easily detected by chemical analysis. The distinctive smoky flavor found in various types of whiskey, especially Scotch, is due to the use of peat smoke to treat the malt. A variety of methods are employed in the distillation process to remove unwanted fusel oils. Whiskey that has been aged in oak barrels absorbs substances from the wood. In an experiment, whiskey aged 3 years in orbit on the International Space Station tasted and measured significantly different from similar test subjects in gravity on Earth. Depending on the local regulations, additional flavorings and coloring compounds may be added to the whiskey. Canadian whiskey may contain caramel and flavoring in addition to the distilled mash spirits. Scotch whiskey may contain added E150A caramel coloring, but no other additives. The addition of flavorings is not allowed in American straight whiskey, but is allowed in American blends.